Hello, everyone. Bart Sibrel here. I hope you're having a great Thanksgiving weekend with friends, family, and good food. You've probably already seen part one, where I did a very unique interview with a podcast called The Other Side of the News. And we talked about not only the moon landing fraud, but also JFK, ESP, and aliens, and how NASA may be involved in an alien adventure in the next few years. In fact, I'm going to be writing a book about that, and I'll be recording an audiobook, which I read myself. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to need new microphone, new soundproofing, because I'm moving to a new location. A lot of dogs barking, so I'm going to need really good soundproofing there. Please show your support by clicking on the PayPal donate link below. You don't need a PayPal account to make a donation. You can just use your debit card. The link beneath that is for my book, Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List, which is available in print, Kindle, or audio, which I read myself. And the third link is for a weekly podcast I do that you can subscribe to. Your support is greatly needed, more than at any other time. I implore you to please show your thanks with a kind donation through the link below. Thank you. If I may comment on another one to keep an eye out for, that you discussed either privately before we started recording. I don't know if it was part of the recording, but right now, 75% of Americans know that Oswald did not shoot Kennedy. 50% of Americans know that explosives, not airplanes, brought down the buildings on 9/11. And 25% believe the craziest of all conspiracy theories, that the moon missions were falsified. Now, that's a big group. So I interpret this to mean at least 1 out of 4 people are following alternative media. So that they have to take that into account for misinformation, especially when that 25% is 4 times as vocal about sharing what they believe than the people who are hypnotized. So
well, there's that, and that number's really rapidly increasing, as we know. I mean, this is, we've been doing this over 3.5 years, this particular show, and you can look at the numbers of mainstream media and see what's going on, where we're. They're losing all their audience. They've lost all their credibility. So this is fantastic.
Right. Well, I say this to lead up to, and this is one more intermittent step in this logic that I'm trying to lay out, with the thing that had been going on for the last 3 years. I believe they had one lie for the general public, the 75%, which is that this illness came from an animal. And then they had another lie for the critical thinking people, which is this illness came from a medical facility. I think both are lies, okay? If it were genuine, then they wouldn't have to fake those particular swabs that go up your nose, and the inventor of them said they show false positives 95% of the time, and then they wouldn't have to call motorcycle decapitations and hospice cancer deaths and gunshot wounds to the self-inflicted to the head deaths of this particular disease if either were true. So I say that
is, I mean, they had it calibrated to influenza, which interestingly enough disappeared for 2 years straight. We know that it was a pandemic. We can read their own documents, right? I mean, if you're a researcher.
Well, what I'm suggesting though, okay, is that this whole idea that this illness is genuine and that it really secretly escaped from a medical facility. I want to caution people, I believe that's a lie. And you see, they don't care why you believe the moon landings are real, as long as you do. If you believe Neil Armstrong did it, great. If you believe secret astronauts communing with aliens did it, great. You see, if you believe it came from an animal, great. If you believe it came from a medical facility, great, as long as you believe it's real when it's not. Now, I say this to caution alternative media people because they can have their buttons pushed just as easily as everybody else through disclosure, leaked documents, military confessions. Now, remember, NASA, reliable NASA, criminal, gangster, moon landing picture faking NASA are the very same people who released pictures of pyramids and faces on Mars. So if they can fake full close-up on the ground pictures of an astronaut standing on the moon, when in fact we now know they were at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. You have to read my book, Moon Man, at Sibrel.com to hear the deathbed confession of the chief of security who said so. Okay, so if they're faking,
he was also a murderer.
He was also a
murderer. Yeah, a lot of murders
correct.
in this.
So if they're faking, my point is, if they're faking full body, high resolution pictures in 1968 that they claim are on the moon, which are at an Air Force base in New Mexico, then I suggest that the pyramid face pictures are also fake. There's a video of von Braun, in charge of the fake moon landing, his closest friend, saying before he died, he warned that the federal government was going to fake an alien invasion.
And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it, he said, is a lie.
So they plant the seeds, predictive programming, in the alternative media people. You see, that aliens are real, faces on Mars, pyramids on Mars. They align to Orion, but they faked the entire moon mission, telemetry, photographs, rockets. They could easily fake satellite pictures of Mars with the pyramid in a face and align it to Orion and blah, 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 to trick the alternative media people into believing in aliens, because the man who faked the moon landing said before he died they're planning on faking an alien invasion.
And all of it, he said, is a lie.
So if you go to Sibrel.com, scroll down halfway, there's an in-depth article. I spent 200 hours writing and researching it. Are there really aliens? And I say what von Braun said, no, there are not. These pictures, which all the alternative media people are using to support the aliens, are from the very same people who gave you pictures that claimed was on the moon. So if the moon pictures are fake, I say the alien pictures are fake too. That's just the next generation's candy. The Bible, you know, you quoted the Bible, it says in the last days, people will gather around them a great number of teachers that tell them what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn away from the truth and follow myths. Moon landing is a myth, and I say aliens are a myth too.
We do know that they do make these plans well in advance. We do know that they use them for nefarious purposes, and one of them is control. So I just wanted to finish out on this in regards to the whole situation with NASA. I mean, I laid it out pretty clearly, what I think about NASA, not good. But also the whole idea of what was the control feature that you see that came out of this, or that they were trying to use, or what do you think was going on with that? Why they did this? What was the motivation?
I used to think it was pride. That's how my film opens up. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. You can see it for free at Sibrel.com on the homepage. It opens up with the scripture where there is pride, then comes disgrace. And then we show the Tower of Babel. Up until about 200 years ago, which means for thousands of years of civilization, the greatest technological accomplishment for 99% of history is the tallest building. And it's still really going on today. Dubai does it, and then the United States does it, and then Tokyo does it, the tallest building. And it was said in the Bible that they're doing it to reach God, and they're doing it to boast. We're doing it to show off to the rest of the nations of the world. And interestingly, it was never finished. Then I showed the Titanic, which at the time was the largest single machine ever built by the human hand. And they put in publicity pictures, believe it or not, the ship that God himself could not sink. Also never finished, never made one voyage. And then Richard Nixon, when he knew they were not on the moon, nevertheless said putting a man on the moon is the greatest event since God created the universe, second only to that. You see, it's a blasphemous claim. It's a spiritual thing that they faked the moon landing. It's corruption that they killed Kennedy. It's murderous that they did 9/11. This is different. It's different in that it's a positive lie that the Americans want to believe to this day, but it's also spiritually significant. It's the greatest accomplishment of mankind, and it never happened. So I first thought pride. Kennedy, not a scientist, saw Alan Shepard go up into outer space, didn't even orbit the Earth, only went from the East Coast to the West Coast for 15 minutes, and then he says within 3 days we're going to go to the moon before the end of the 1960s. That later proved an impossibility. In fact, it's impossible to this day. A little sidestep here. You can prove that the moon missions are fake with logic, okay? Because today, with 50 years better technology, NASA can only send astronauts as far as 1,000th the distance to the moon. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. Somehow with 1960s technology, you can play golf and drive cars on the moon. And with 50 years better technology, you can only send mannequins to orbit and not land. So what they're really claiming is they had 1,000 times greater space traveling capability in 1969 with 1/1,000th the computing power of the cell phone than they do today, which means they're saying that technology was greater in the past than in the future for the first time in human history, which is a scientific and historical impossibility. So that proves it. So Kennedy misspoke and said we're going to go by the end of the decade. Little side note, second to the last chapter in Moon Man is NASA's greatest fear, when the relatives of the dead astronauts pointed out to me that the crew that was going to be the first crew to walk on the moon, when the commander held an impromptu press conference, took reporters up to the top of the rocket without permission, and affixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit on the top of it, and said this thing is a lemon, a piece of junk. He was later killed by the CIA. His own wife told me so. So I first thought, and maybe it's true, I don't know, that the reason why they faked it was pride. Kennedy said we're going to go by the end of the decade, and if we don't, we'll look foolish. And so we can't look foolish. Our pride is why they faked the moon landing. Now, Other people said it's the money. I think it's a multifaceted thing. I don't know what the number one reason was. It could have been pride, but then they made money because they're only doing Earth orbit. So, I mean, of the $3 trillion, what percentage did they actually spend on COVID? 10%? What of that, equivalent of $200 billion did they spend to fake going to the moon and to put a spacecraft into Earth orbit, which they had already done successful anyway? 25% of that at the most. So they got that. Then they got a distraction. They got the benefit of a pep rally. Nixon, Tricky Dick Nixon, said the number one enemy of America is not Russia, not China. It's American citizens who are protesting the federal government over the Vietnam War. So you throw them a bone of a pep rally, a guarantee, 100% success guarantee that the moon missions will be successful because you're faking it. That's why President Johnson, who was there for the first day of filming at Cannon Air Force Base on June 1st, 1968, according to an eyewitness, he called the fake moon landing codename Slam Duck. Because if you're faking the moon landing, you can guarantee a success, which makes it easy and makes it a slam dunk. So that was a benefit. You have the money benefit, you have the pride benefit, you have the giving a distraction to the American people. And I suspect their success at faking it was even greater than they had imagined. I mean, one of the reasons Johnson, and maybe the reason, why he did not run for re-election when he was eligible. That's only happened once before in the entire history of the presidency. He was eligible to run for re-election, and he didn't do so. I believe because he knew they were going to fake the moon landing in the next term. And who knew that would work? They hoped it would work. They thought it was probable it would work. But what if you got caught as president faking the moon landing? Didn't want to have anything to do with that. And get this, Nixon, you have the whole world watching. You have dignitaries from every nation on earth at NASA in the VIP section. You have the vice president there, but Richard Nixon chooses not to be there. He doesn't want a picture of him there. Now, when they got away with it, he shows up for the second launch. Well, why wasn't he there for the first launch? Because he knew it was fake. And what if you got caught? Didn't want a picture for all time, him smiling and shaking Neil Armstrong's hand. He literally distanced himself from it, just like Johnson did. So, what other reasons? I think afterwards they got a benefit from it, because I think they realized how easy it was to fool people. In fact, a lot of reasons why I hear from people the moon missions must be real. Number one is the government wouldn't lie about such an important thing. And the other reason is I believe it because I saw it on television. Yeah, the cat agrees with me. And so that, I think, is a reason now. It shows them, it emboldens them to continue to trick people, especially through television. The average American watches 35 hours of television a week. If you add YouTube and smartphones and tablets and computers, it'll be well over that, which means Americans spend more time watching images that are virtual reality than they do at work every week. You see, for the last 100 years until about 5 years ago, in every biology book you would read, they said that praying mantises are cannibals, that after they mate, they eat their mate. And the reason is they would take, a laboratory, and they did it year after year. They put in 50 10-gallon aquariums and put 2 praying mantises in each one, male and female. And every single time, after they mated, the female would eat the male. So they said they're cannibals. Every textbook said praying mantises are cannibals. And then about 5 years ago, some out-of-the-box thinking person, and I have a podcast, it's on my website, Bart Sibrel's Box Escape, that you can subscribe to, he said, well, why don't we study them in the wild? Well, they don't eat each other in the wild. Okay, so what does that mean? You have this highly intelligent insect, perhaps the most intelligent insect, and when you confine it, it becomes crazy. And I'm telling you that when people are living in a virtual world mentally instead of a real world, it makes them crazy. Go into any restaurant, and I dare you to prove me wrong. Walk around and look at the tables. I assure you, 90% of the people in every restaurant you go to have their faces in their cell phones instead of talking to people and having fellowship with people who are right across the table from them. Even couples. I saw a couple in a restaurant sitting side by side on the same side of the table. How romantic. Out on one of their early dates, both with their faces and cell phones. You see, this is making people crazy, and it's making people super susceptible to being deceived.
I would totally agree with that. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my co-host, Timothy.
Well, Bart, thank you very much for coming on the show. I'm delighted you're here. I've watched quite a lot of your reference material. I've looked at it very critically. And before I go into some of the more details, I'd like to just give you a little bit of context where I stand on this. I mean, one of my very first memories in life was probably I wasn't conscious enough to be watching the live footage, the fourth generation imagery that came on the black and white TV when apparently Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. However, I do have a strong memory of, I guess, one of the other moon landing missions that was presented. I remember creeping down the stairs and creeping underneath the sofa. My parents were watching the TV, and I was watching from under the TV. And I remember that, this was quite a thing to watch this worldwide broadcast of mankind landing on the moon. So I was fascinated by the technology, and I'm still fascinated by the technology. I follow not all the missions, but many of the missions in quite a lot of detail. So I sailed through life quite happily, believing that mankind landed on the moon. I even referenced it in my thesis when I was in university. And then not so long ago, I was looking into the Artemis and the Orion mission. And I always remember that there was one interview with some NASA official saying that one of the biggest problems to overcome is traveling through the Van Allen belt.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. For this flight, it's time to head home. We won't have astronauts inside.
We're going to have to find a way to pass through these apparently dangerous radiation belts that start 1,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, and then the second one finishes around 25,000 miles further. So that's quite a large portion of the journey to the moon, and apparently something which mankind is very vulnerable to the radiation. And so that really started asking lots of questions in my mind. That then went on to me looking at everything far more critically. So especially following on from the Artemis and the Orion mission, which in my opinion is really a sort of a glorified collection of junk items that have been put together in new technology and sort of pasted up as something new and brilliant. But I mean, it's obviously a completely and utterly unsustainable dinosaur of a project. And yet it still draws in millions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money every year, which, in my opinion, I don't know how many American citizens are asked, would you like to contribute this amount of your tax to the NASA efforts this year? So I'm just recapping a little. This, in my opinion, does substantiate the idea that, NASA could well be a giant laundromat for money, for currency. That gives a little bit of context to what we were saying earlier. But what I'd like to move on to is, without going into all of the details at this stage, of which there are hundreds of details. I have 6 pages of notes with questions, but I guess we're not going to get through them this time. I'd like to ask you the question, Bart. If in the 1960s, NASA announced, guys, following on from Kennedy's speech, I don't think we're going to be able to pull this off. I mean, von Braun was quoted as saying there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that we can pull this mission off and bring these astronauts back on live TV safely. If NASA had come out and said, hand on heart, we did our best, but we need another 5 years or another 10 years or another 3 years, whatever it is, and they said, we're not going to go to the moon this time, we're going to go in the mid-70s. How would the world look today if that was the case? That's my question.
I think it would be a very different world. Not because of the statement, but because of what it represents in the heart of the government. For example, there was an eclipse in 2017, and it fell over the largest pagan sculpture in America, right? If you believe in God, then that's an abomination. And then there'll be another eclipse next year, and it's going to fall over Dallas, Texas. These eclipses are about 7 biblically significant years apart. And Dallas, Texas is where they killed Kennedy, where they, the federal government, killed their own president because he wanted to get rid of corruption in the federal government. I consider that the point of no return. And the pilot term you probably know about being a yacht builder, that if you're flying to Hawaii from Los Angeles, when you get more than halfway there, you can't go back. And there were multiple generals, a dozen generals, who wanted to bring down Hitler, and it wasn't enough. They couldn't do it. The Nazi machine was so out of control, it could not be stopped without bombing the heck out of Berlin. And our federal government, in my opinion, is beyond that state once they killed their own president. So if they were to have admitted they can't go to the moon, and we're going to have to tell the truth about it, well, that would have probably also meant they didn't kill Kennedy, because they would have had the same heart, you see, within the government. So the fact is they did kill Kennedy. The fact is even before him, Eisenhower was afraid to criticize the federal government. And before him, Truman said his biggest mistake as president was forming the CIA, which creates its own laws. I mean, they
interesting name there, by the way, as well.
What's
Truman.
that?
I said he had an interesting name as well, Truman.
Yeah. And then you had President Wilson saying that the forming of the Federal Reserve was the biggest mistake of his presidency. And then, you know, I get emails from time to time that in 1872, the United States became a corporation, and secretly, which means a lot of weird stuff. So we're following a pattern here that I don't think can be stopped. There's a scripture. It says something like, when someone gains money through ill-gotten gain, it will slip through their fingers. And it's not like God is intentionally forcing it to slip through their fingers. It's inevitable, because a mind that grabs money through ill-gotten gain is an unstable mind. And when someone has an unstable mind, the money slips through their fingers through gambling, debauchery, prostitution, drug use, or whatever. And so it's not like God's judgment is going to rebuke America, although I think it will. It's inevitable scientifically and psychologically and historically and behaviorally that when something becomes this corrupt, it becomes self-destructive. Mm-hmm. And that's just the inevitable thing that's going to happen.
A few other items along the way. I mean, this is, randomly skipping through history, but the Titanic, for example, there's quite a lot of evidence. We've done a show on this some years ago about how the Titanic, or where people think the Titanic is actually sitting at the bottom of the ocean, is in fact a sister ship. And there's a whole backstory there. Rockefeller's getting off before the maiden voyage, and Astor, who at that time was the richest property guy on the planet, underwriting most of the mortgages on the planet, he went down with the ship, and he was dead against taking the dollar off the gold standard. So I think it was a year later, Annetta, maybe you can help me out with this, on Jekyll Island, the people who did survive or actually disembarked before the Titanic sank, they came together on Jekyll Island and said, yeah, let's make this dollar, let's cut it off from the gold reserve. And therefore they had the ability to basically print their own budget from that moment on. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's the beginning. However, that is another milestone in the story. So how far does the corruption go back?
Well, what's really odd is that I'm not, believe it or not, I know it's going to sound hard to believe, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a realist. I'm a truth seeker. I say this because every time I hear the latest crazy conspiracy theory, I myself roll my eyes, okay? I'm going to get to the Titanic after the following. I heard about chemtrails like, I don't know, 8-10 years ago. And I'm like rolling my eyes. Oh, give me a break. If it were in the sky, it'd be obvious, blah, blah, blah. And then for whatever reason, I started waking up a little bit before sunrise for like a year. I go out to my balcony, which faces the city, which is nowhere near the airport, and just under cover of darkness, they're just finishing up this grid pattern in the sky month after month, year after year, with a few days off, that when you watch, they widen and widen and widen and become these carpet clouds. It's as obvious as the sun that chemtrails are real. And then I remember hearing, this crazy conspiracy. Okay, they brought down the Titanic to get rid of the people against the Federal Reserve. I'm like, give me a break. Everything's not a conspiracy. But then again, if you wanted to get rid of a bunch of people who were opposed to your financial control of the world, you could say good guy rich people, which there are good guy rich people. But super practical way, seeing how you can print money, you build a ship, it doesn't matter how much it costs. $10 billion, who cares? You suck everybody on board with free tickets. Then, for some strange reason, imagine if you went on an airplane that had 300 seats, but it only had 150 oxygen bags that would drop down. Would even such a plane be built? Of course not. Come on. It's obvious. So you have a ship that has something like, 2,500 seats, and you have 1,500 seats on all the lifeboats. Why would you even build such a thing? But unless it's intentional, and then you're in the age of chivalry where men give up their seats for women and children. And how else can you kill, 100 or however many it was of the rich people all at one time and make it not look like a homicide? It would be ingenious. I don't know if the Titanic was a conspiracy, but what I'm saying is it could easily be. I don't understand how anyone could ever sexually molest a child. I just can't comprehend it, but apparently they are. I don't understand why a film exposing it, that talking about the film would be taken down from YouTube. I just don't understand that. And getting back to your interesting comment about True Man, he was kind of an accidental president after all. I remember being a young 20-ish filmmaker in Nashville, Tennessee, who could take off Tuesday at noon. I went to see The Truman Show. I don't know when that was, in the early 90s or something. I'm probably the only person in the theater. And being a little, cocky as a kid, I walk out after about the first 20 minutes. I say, this is dumb. This is the dumbest film I've ever seen. This is totally implausible, illogical, would never happen. Dumb, waste of millions of dollars and my valuable time. Now I love the movie. I watch it at least once a year and cry every time I see it, from the symbolism, the true man, Christ stuff. Storms are good for you. Overcoming fear is good for you. And anyway, if someone came to me with this script as a filmmaker and says, okay, we got this idea. It's about this country, which everyone from around the world wants to come to. You know what I mean? They want to immigrate to. It's the greatest and great opportunity and freedom, and they're always saving people in wars. And they landed on the moon, but it all ends up being fake. And they kill their most honest president in broad daylight, and they fake the moon landing, and they fake diseases, and they, are murdering their own people, and blah, blah, blah. I would say, next. It's not realistic. Mm-hmm. This is the world we're living in. The most strangest thing about the moon landing fraud is that it's real. We really are. Now, if you believe in the Bible, or at least the potential it could be true. I went to a church once, and on a Wednesday night where it's more interactive, they said, who's Lord of the earth? And everyone's like, Jesus. And the preacher said, wrong. Read your Bible. Read Luke chapter 4. Jesus, while he's fasting, tempted by the devil, taken to a pinnacle and shown all the kingdoms of the world. And Lucifer says, if Jesus bows down and worships him, he'll give him all the kingdoms of the world because they belong to Lucifer. And Lucifer can give them to anyone he wants. That's why the leaders of the world are liars and murderers and thieves. You see, this is the world we live in. To tell you the truth, Timothy, I'm surprised that in the United States of America, you can walk from your house to the store during daylight and not get robbed or murdered. I mean, in such a fallen world that we have. Keep in mind, with all the coordinated looting going on in major cities, when there's no riots, no war, no economic collapse, and they're doing that now, you know, I suggest people leave the USS Titanic, America, before it's too late. Because when the real illness starts circulating, you're going to be stuck where you are. And I suggest it not be on the USA Titanic, my personal opinion. And so this is the world we live in. And even though all these things are true, they did fake the moon landing. They did kill their own president. They did, you know, fake an illness, and they're trying to kill people. You know, I was reading an article about the Rockefeller Foundation and how they want to lower the population. They say out of their own mouth, I want to lower the population, right? Well, what does that mean? It's so simple. What lowering the population means getting rid of billions of people, murdering, killing millions and billions of people. They're saying it out of their own mouth. Hey, it's a great idea. We want to lower the population. It's a great idea. We want to murder most people on the earth. That's what lowering the population means. It means killing billions of people. And then the lead advisor to the World Economic Forum that literally has 666 hidden in plain sight in their logo, okay, crystal clear, just look for it, 666 right in their logo. He says out of his own mouth worse things than Hitler ever did. We've got 3 or 4 billion useless people not contributing to the economy, not giving me money. And how are we going to get rid of them? I guess we need to come up with some plan.
The biggest question maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades will be what to do with all these useless people.
Now, I, God willing, please pray, may make my first feature film in the near future. I am not twiddling my thumbs hoping it's going to happen. I have a plan. I have a script, I have a producer, I have a budget, I have a cast. You see, I have a location. If the trillionaires who control the world have a plan to lower the population by 94%, meaning if there's a room of 34 people, they want to get rid of 32 of them, okay? Luckily, Timothy, you and I are those two. What a relief. But don't think that they're twiddling their thumbs hoping, wouldn't that be nice if it happened? They have a plan, and that plan is well underway. Don't think it's a coincidence that fertility rates have dropped by 65% when technology is increasing. Technology increasing means health should be increasing and fertility rates should be going up. Longevity in the United States, where we have the best healthcare in the world, is going down when technology is going up unless it's intentional. What does the Bible say about this messed up state we're in? Book of Acts, chapter 2. Save yourself from this corrupt generation. Yes, they faked the moon landing. Yes, they killed Kennedy, but repent and live forever, and they will regret it. They will have gained the world and forfeit their soul. So
I'd like to ask you a question, if I may.
Yeah.
You reference the Bible and many verses frequently through your various podcasts and writings. What makes you think that that is so reliable and so true?
Well, because I've read it. It's
So
like,
have I.
yeah, but the thing is, you used to think the moon missions were real, and you studied it with an open mind, and now you know otherwise.
I've done the same with the Bible personally, but that's my personal view.
Okay, well, yeah, but I look at it. I always associated the Bible with hypocritical religion. I don't want to have anything to do with either one of them. And so, but I threw the baby out with the bathwater. When the Bible says on the second month of the year, on the 15th day, at this particular place in the valley of such and such happened, I believe it. Okay. 11 of Jesus's 12 apostles were given the opportunity to live if they recanted that Jesus raised the dead, walked on water, came back from the dead, and gave sight to the blind. If you say he never did all that stuff, we'll let you live. And 11 of the 12 says we refuse to say that. We saw him raise the dead. We saw him give sight to the blind. We saw him after he was crucified. Why would 11 people throw away their life for a lie? They wouldn't. That's proof that it happened. Now, just because we can't comprehend something doesn't mean it's not true. We have to assume that if people say the Red Sea parted, did they lie or are they telling the truth? I assume they're telling the truth. Every hero in the Bible is criticized. Every hero in the Bible makes grievous mistakes that if they were doctoring up the Bible, they would have covered up, including incest and, murdering people and committing adultery. These are the heroes in the Bible. And so I say if they're willing to tell the truth about that, it's the truth. Just because we can't comprehend something doesn't mean it's not true. My dog cannot comprehend a starter, an ignition, the engine, the fuel pump. It knows the machine is inanimate. It probably knows that I direct it. But no matter how hard I try, it will never understand a spark plug. Just because we can't comprehend an eternal being who decided to have his son come down and die for us, just because we can't comprehend that doesn't mean it's not true.
Well, I assume you're not inferring that I cannot comprehend a universal being, a universal spirit, or those sort of things. We don't really know each other that well. However, what I'm saying is the way that I look at the Bible is it's pretty simple and straightforward. Proverbs says all these things that you agree with, that evil people will be brought down, that their own evil will cause their own defeat. You agree with all those things, and all those things are said in Proverbs by the wisest man who ever lived. And so, I just look at it, and it seems pretty simple and self-explanatory to me. A lot of times it was written over a great deal of time and edited by no end of people who happened to be the victors at the time. So people say the truth is written by
but the thing is, that's an excellent point. And here's the other side of it. If God can make the universe, if God can make your eye and your heart, and if God can know before from the beginning of time, you and I would have this conversation. See, both are true. Free will, and God knows what we're going to choose before we ever choose it. If God can do all that, then I think he has enough strength left over in his pinky to prevent one book from being corrupted. Monopoly comes with rules. And God would be cruel to give us this life and not give us rules to go by. And when they compared the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were like 3,500 years old, they were word for what the translation is today because they were honorable to the translation.
But there's also a lot more information that has not yet been decoded in the Dead Sea Scrolls and not yet circulated, which could show a different context.
Well, I mean, the thing is, did the things in the Bible happen? Did, Egypt and the 10 plagues? Jewish people who think Christianity is wrong admit all those things happened. Now, one guy associated with the Titanic comes up, believe it or not, with 10 logical explanations while every plague happened at that particular time so that there's no God. And you can come up with all these explanations why the shadows intersecting and the radiation and all this, that the fact that it proves the moon landings are fake, that all that's not true if you want to. You can believe anything you want. The college professor says if Buzz Aldrin confessed it was fake, he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. So anyone can twist anything around to anything they want it to be in their mind.
True.
Yeah. So
all of us included. May I ask okay, let's just say that the Bible is a factual record, and I don't know, because I wasn't there when it was written at various times through history. But let's just say it is. How would a text be written apparently thousands of years ago, which is now coming to fruition now? Does that mean that there is a visionary element to this, or a future prediction element to this? Or do you think that somehow we're just following a script like the Truman Show? How would you explain the document predicting the future?
Let's just say the Truman Show plot is real, okay? And we'll equate that with life. We have this setup by God, but we also have free will within it, right? Truman can go to the left. He can go to the right. He can cheat on his wife. He can be faithful to his wife. You see that? He could have, gone to the wall when he was 12 years old if he wanted to. You see what I'm saying? And so it's kind of like that. God has given us dominion over the earth, and we have free will within it. Now, the book of Revelation talks about events that have not yet happened. I believe those are true. It says that God knows the end before the beginning. I myself have been tested by entities in the federal government when I was a teenager for ESP, because I developed proof after proof after proof that I predicted events before they happened. Now, there are three types of ESP. There's psychokinesis, which is allegedly moving something without touching it, which I have done subconsciously but not consciously. Then there's telepathy, which is picking up on someone else's thoughts. Well, if I can send out electricity from my electric brain to the molecules in a coffee cup, maybe I could push it. That would explain that. If thoughts are electric and you're near me, why not, like a radio wave, I can pick up on your thoughts? And I occasionally would hear the thoughts of other people, but in my brain, I audibly heard their voice. It sounded like them speaking a particular word. Later, they told me they only thought it. But that explains that scientifically, right? Electricity, moving the object, electricity, radio wave, going from your transmission center to my receiving center.
Frequency resonance, yes.
But the third one is tricky. The third one is the precognitive ability. How can you know something scientifically before it has happened? Well, believe it or not, when I'm like 16 years old, the first three books I read from cover to cover in my life were all about Einstein and the theory of relativity. And I didn't turn the page until I visualized it. So I laid in bed for 3 days. What's the physical explanation? How can you know something before it happened? The only conclusion that came to mind is the only way you could know something before it happened, which I have done, is if it's actually already happened. And the concept that it hasn't happened yet is an illusion. For example, let's say you're on Mars and I'm on Earth, and I say, hey, Timothy, how's it going on video conferencing? You'll get that signal 20 to 40 minutes later, depending on how far away Mars is. It'll look like it's live, but actually, I said it 20 to 40 minutes ago. So imagine life is like an LP, right? The needle is now, but the next track is what it is.
And yet
see
it's preordained.
The only way that I could know something before it has happened is if it's already happened, you see? And if you saw, interestingly enough, a very well-made movie, Men in Black 3, right, which features the Apollo launch, which is really interesting. It also features a quote that's every chapter of my book at Sibrel.com, which has 16 interactive video links, has a quote. And one of the quotes is from Men in Black 3. The bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie. You see? And the guy, Griff, he takes them, or they show up at, I forget, Yankee Stadium, and he acts like he's watching a game, the 69 World Series. They're like, what are you looking at? There's nobody here. And he says it's always 1969 October. It's always July, 1972. And when I see that, every time I see that, my mind says he's right. He's right.
I can give time to that. Yes, absolutely. That concept. Yes.
Yeah. And this is why, take it to the next step here. This is why the information about a prophecy is vague. It has to be. If, let's say, I have a prediction, your plane that you have booked for tomorrow is going to blow up after takeoff. And I'm trying to save your life. I go down to the airport and I say, check the plane. Please check the plane. Everyone thinks I'm crazy except one mechanic. He checks it again and again and again. Finds a rusty fuel valve that would have burst after takeoff. He replaces it. The plane takes off and lands without a problem. You're not killed. Okay. But if I have a true psychic prediction of the future, that means it is going to happen and it cannot be stopped. If I change the event, then I cannot have the prediction in the first place, which means the amount of information in a psychic prediction or prophecy is limited to the amount where more information changes the event, because if you change the event, you can't have the prediction in the first place, which also means if a prophecy is genuine, it is going to happen. It can't be stopped. And specifically about Revelation, God says that these plagues, which include meteor showers, diseases, economic collapse, they come to encourage mankind to repent of their sin and to turn to God. But then it also says that they will not do that. They will not do that. So both are true. We have free will, and the choices that we will make in the future, God already knows and has prophesied about. Plagues come to prick people to turn to God. They love sin more than God. And so most of mankind is wiped out, right? That's just the way it is, which, when Jesus says in the last days, which I believe we're in, that unless God intervenes at the very end, everyone would perish. I take that to mean that the evil people, they are going to win. They're doing a fabulous job. They killed Kennedy in broad daylight. They faked the Gulf of Tonkin. They faked the moon landing. They did 9/11. They did this little thing for the last 3 years. They're just getting better and better and better. Technically, they could be stopped. But are people who are watching 40 hours of TV a week going to have the time left over to stop them? No. So even though technically we could overpower the deep state, I don't think it's going to happen, which is just save yourself, repent yourself, and end up living forever, and the people will have gained the world and lost their soul.
It's hard to believe, but we're at the end of the show. We're just like, I can't believe it. This has been a fascinating conversation. Is there any last thoughts that you want to give us before we close?
The most important thing, even though they did fake the moon landing and kill Kennedy, that's not really the focus of life, which is to make sure we enter the next one, right? That's the most important thing. And to stay faithful, to stay unselfish, to put God first, to help people turn away from sin, right, toward God. One of my prayers is that someone in this world leader Illuminati group will repent and give glory to God and confess as a sign. Maybe Noah's Ark will be found in the last days to prove the Bible is true. Maybe the truth about the moon landing will come out before the end as a cold glass of water in the face of mankind to say, see? Hopefully that'll happen, but I truly believe you and Timothy, we really are both right about our facet of what we see on our side of the sphere. What we need to do is have, I guess, maybe 2,000 hours of conversation, and then we would end up agreeing about everything.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on this show on the other side of the news, Bart. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart. I look forward to continuing this exhilarating conversation sometime soon.
And there you have it. That's the conclusion of the interview I recently did with the other side of the news. Special thanks to Cynthia, Timothy Saunders, and Annetta Driscoll. And again, please show your support because I will be writing a book about aliens and NASA's potential involvement. It will be an audiobook. I'm moving to a new location that's a bit on the noisy side, so I need a new microphone, soundproofing, and all that. And seeing how I'm semi-retired, I was fired from NBC for working on this film. I was kicked out of churches. I lost corporate accounts, all for pursuing the truth. It has also been emotionally exhausting, and as you know from reading my book, I've risked my life for this truth to come out for the betterment of mankind. I'm asking for your support now more than ever. There's a link beneath this video for PayPal. You don't have to have a PayPal account to make a donation. You just need a debit card, and the link beneath that is for my book, in case you don't have it, about the moon landing fraud, available in Kindle, print, and audio that I read myself. And the third link is for my weekly podcast, and I discuss alternative media. You can go to that link and view about that. So please, during this Thanksgiving Day holiday, show your kind support and your thanks for all my tireless effort that I've done to expose this and other frauds. And I really need your support to make this new audiobook. It would help me out so much. So thank you so much for your kind support. Take care. Have a great holiday, and hope to see you soon. If you want to see all of this information, most of it's for free at Sibrel.com, including an article about aliens, the moon landing films, the moon landing book, and a way to subscribe to my new podcast.